Doodle doo 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 doo. Secrets of Sea of Secrets. Greetings, I'm Demonac, and this is a big fat behind the scenes on Sea of Secrets Episode 8. Don't touch the orb. This was a big episode, not just because it took me inappropriately long to finish it. So, I mean, every Secrets of Sea of Secrets is full of spoilers, but some spoilers matter more than others, so spoiler warning. This cold open is one of those scenes that I added in the adaptation to tie things together. First off, it's a good chance to reinforce the friendship between Blue and Jinx, as well as the dynamic that Jinx is helping the team. She likes the party, but she still has this other loyalty they don't know about, and is still lying to cover it. Even to Blue. Later, when everybody's discussing what to do with the orb, she suggests she knows a place to take it. But you could easily miss the implications because Misho kind of ran over her with, "This is too dangerous to bring back to civilization." I hoped this segment would add a little more context to that otherwise minor line. Of course, Blue can tell she's lying. "Didn't want to wake the person with the message-detecting coat" was not her best work, but he cares more that she's okay. She helped him hide his impulsive, attempted murder by not telling the others. And by this point, he's inclined to trust her about what really matters, regardless of what she feels she needs to hide. And of course, it's a good excuse to give them extra screen time, since I know what's coming. Linking Carl to the jungle killings, for the viewer, doesn't hurt either. The party more explicitly calls it out later, but that's in the middle of the fight. This let me work in the suspense aspect, playing around with watching Jinx walk away, using the camera as a point of view, like in a horror movie, and trying to trick the viewer into conflating Blue's POV, which I showed as black and white, dark vision, with what Carl was doing in the red-tinted view, moving the severed owlbear head into their path where they had found it last episode. All in all, I felt it was a pretty tight scene to foreshadow the episode without you suspecting any of what is to come. And of course, when you rewatch it, the open will feel very different. The sailor discussions were so messy at the table. You have no idea how much time we spent butting heads trying to convince charmed sailors to be less charmed, which sounds silly, but it was clear they were less directly mind-controlled and much more driven by desperation and the sunk cost fallacy. All this while trying to deal with the fact that they had murdered their captain, which hurt Melira so much, and which the sailors themselves were in denial of. And also, the party were trying to figure out this stupid stone portal thing. The discussion went in circles so long that, honestly, it's hard to blame Blue for deciding that was enough and taking action? As usual, I actually downplayed how aggressive, randomly violent Blue was. Margot, the Drac lieutenant who Melira had mentioned, looks down at the orb in her hand. "Okay, melt her brain. I'm serious. I'm attacking." I mean, she's got the orb, and she is the one who killed their captain. And they're trying to get it through that portal. We don't know what the orb is telling her. You can talk to the orb and find out after. DC-15 will save. Why do I roll so ridiculous for all the saves? The orb! I think it just zapped Margot. Bluff 24? Why would the orb do something like that? We're trying to do what it asked. Because it's evil! Did you not run into any of those floating hate balls back there? A bunch of them tried to zap us on the way here. Those aren't the same thing. Those things were messed up. We barred the door to keep them out. But now we're stuck in here because we don't understand this thing. It's supposed to be a portal. Well, give me a chance. Jagada and I were able to decipher the murals in the fire room. Maybe I can learn something about your portal and enlighten us all. Margot points her saber at Blue from across the room. You claim you're here to save us. The orb will make us all rich. We don't have to fight over it. No, we came to save us. Okay. Gonna have some work to do there, diplomacy girl. Yeah, Is it next round yet? Anybody who hasn't acted should have a chance. Well, I'm not starting this fight. I thought I already started it. At this point, I just look at Blue and go, nerf it. Yeah! Haha! I can bluff in diplomacy all day, but he's just gonna go, yeah, yeah! I can't keep going all day. I only have so many PowerPoints. Except, I can't even keep straight the order of things because elsewhere in my notes I have, your friend just tried to attack. That was him, not me. Who said we were friends? Okay, what do you say? Well, that's different because, look, Paylor's doing something. Of course, when Blue does get the orb, he changes his tune, calling for a ceasefire. All the players knew out of character because I wasn't trying to hide the mind control, but they had justifications for their in-character suspicions. If Blue is calling for people to get along, we'll know something is up. That is definitely mind control. When the elf lunged at Blue anyway, showing that the orb was not tightly controlling people, or possibly just not coordinating them, I did actually make an attack roll for her, and it was a natural 1. She's like 7 feet tall, right? I just sit down. She swings right over your head, leaving herself off balance. When Jinx was threatening to get revenge on Margot, while the Drac was brainlocked, Melira was actually going to try to stop her, getting away physically, but when I said she'd make an opposed attack roll, that's when Jinx backed down, without rolling. Of course, Adria ended the fight invisible, with the orb. Adria, you might as well come out. I'll try to sleight of hand the orb into Jinx's pocket. Natural 1. Unfortunately, it's big enough that you have to open the flap of the bag more than you wanted, and everyone sees a sliver of golden glow become visible as the orb leaves your possession. I'll bluff him. I can convince them. Boy, did anybody else feel that gust of wind? Lifted my flap right up. Her bluff check was not enough to overcome Adria's natural 1, though, which is why everyone knew where the orb was when trying to rest. But Blue was charmed out of finishing the fight, and though killing one person and disabling Margot was enough to shock the survivors into accepting the new situation, for the moment, we were then just drawn into more discussions of next steps. Where's the orb? Or who gets to hold the orb? Who gets the wishes when we find out the genie that the orb claims is in the treasure room deep in the temple? Anyway, I hope the start of the episode didn't feel slow, because it took a lot of work to organize all that stuff and more in and out of character and trim it down to the streamlined form I ended up showing. This is a bit of a spoiler, I suppose, but I did not intend for the players to be able to open this portal. Between Adria's use magic device, Jinx's ability to shapeshift, and one other thing, they were actually a lot closer to being able to do it than I expected. That said, 5 stones, 5 PCs was purely a coincidence. So why put in a portal they can't use if the quest is to explore the rest of the temple? Thing is, the orb can't expect those rando sailors to defeat whatever challenges I have in store for the party. That would be stupid. Unless the orb is evil enough to risk all their lives on the slimmest chance of success, and risk being stranded in some trap-filled room that nobody else might encounter for centuries. Whereas this portal was an objective that a couple dozen athletic normies could plausibly reach, especially if you didn't know about Carl. Which raises another interesting thought. The orb knew about the temple, seemingly knew there was a portal, and where that portal leads, but clearly isn't all-knowing, doesn't even know everything about the temple, since it apparently thought, or hoped, the sailors could open that portal. Which reminds me, there was a semi-subtle joke in the episode that was actually an understated rewrite of this discussion, which, to be clear, wasn't Paylor's fault at all. I think Misho's going to have to defer to you guys on this. You're more worldly, at least on arcane subjects and reading. Plus, it sounds more fun. So Misho sticks his dick in one of the tentacle holes. Paylor, no! What? Don't look at me. Sorry, force of habit. Misho, no! Honestly, I had no idea how genitally those stones would look till I tried to draw them from my description. Silly portal tricks aside, the orb had those sailors standing around for at least a day or two trying to figure out the portal, even though the most magical one of them might have been the Eladrin who casts single missile magic missile. Yes, that's how it works in 3.5 edition. One missile, plus one at odd-numbered levels. 5th edition players are used to getting 3 magic missiles per casting right from first level. Anyway, it's only after seeing the PCs in action, how much more competent they were, how much magic they wield, that the orb even brought up the idea of venturing deeper into the dangerous temple, hunting for the treasure chamber, and the genie. Say what you will about Pelor's player, but he makes interesting roleplay decisions. All the more so without the almost monastic self-imposed constraints that Reginald Black had. Pelor had made pretty clear through the discussion that he thought the orb was bad news, that they'd be better off without it, and if there was a chance that it was all the unknown monster wanted, that it might take the orb and leave the survivors alone, well, that was killing 2 birds with 1 orb as far as Pelor was concerned. So Pelor bided his time till it was his watch, and despite the handful of suspicious sailors watching from a distance, he tried to convince Jinx to just let him take it. Here's how the encounter actually started. Do I have to make a will save to touch the orb, or fight somebody for it? Yeah, you'd have to fight me. Why? It's in my backpack. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to hang on to it until we decide what to do with it. That's what I'm doing. I'm deciding right now. Not sure how he planned to get it out the door past the sailors, given the few on watch would certainly raise hell and wake the rest if they saw the orb come out. Pelor could frankly slaughter most of them, but not without waking the rest of the party, who seemed like they were trying not to murder all the survivors. Jinx was the keeper of the orb, however, since she had made the save and resisted it before they got it wrapped up to avoid direct contact, and hid it in her pack, which was a real animation problem I had to solve this episode since I don't draw the backpacks that, as adventurers, all of them, except Blue, ought to have. Missing backpacks aside, though, Jinx was not particularly tempted by Pelor's offer, or his plan. As she had tried to suggest earlier, she could definitely think of a place to bring this potentially powerful item. So the issue for Jinx was not whether to let Pelor take the orb. She had no interest in that. The question was how to stop or dissuade him from taking it by force. The only real difference from how the scene played out originally is that when shapeshifting into somebody stronger and meaner looking, Jinx actually picked Phil the Thug from the first dungeon, the Halfling Warrens. He was one of the first thug corpses they had found down there, along with a dead halfling, and though it was cut from the fast-paced first episode of SoS, Jinx had taken his shape for a while and approached one room of thugs trying to find out his name, her disguise's name, from the others. His name was Phil. Unfortunately, that didn't go anywhere since those guys had seen Phil die, and the party just killed him anyway. But for the record, Phil the Thug was her first callback shapeshift. Obviously, since Phil had been cut from the scripts and viewers wouldn't know who he was, I went with Boulder instead, who also didn't require a new drawing. As for dealing with the sailors, again, since the party just never stopped pushing them, and I kept having to figure out how they could compromise and back down, I don't think the NPCs truly understood that the 30 of them together couldn't beat the party until after Carl. But even before that, nobody wanted to be the first 5 or 10 to die trying. Regarding them, Pelor pointed out, "They may be mad I killed that elf, but I did bitch slap the other 2 when I clearly could have killed them." As you know, though, the rough night was just getting started. I knew I was going to interrupt their rest. Carl could tell things were getting quiet, and it wanted to start something before these victims were ready, so it gathered some angry spheres and let them in to stir things up. Carl would have let them in earlier, interrupted their rest harder, but the troll doesn't exactly control the spheres. It ended up taking a few hours to wrangle enough of them to make a decent assault. Now, technically the rules imply that if you don't get the full rest, you don't get your spells back, or power points in Blue's case. But we're at 7 out of 8 hours. That feels unfair. But that is the context in which I said, You guys get back half your spells and stuff, and the players found that reasonable, or at least not outrageous. Unfortunately, that's also the context in which Blue's player didn't hear me or something and thought I had not given them the benefits of rest. And I'm frustrated listening to the recordings that I did not clue into that fact, and because I didn't notice, I didn't fix it. Whereas it might have helped even mid-battle to have realized and said, oh no, you were supposed to have recovered half your max PP, you can keep casting. But when you realize Blue had started the fight believing he only had about 4 points to spend on his psionics, that's about 1 fully augmented power, suddenly it makes a little more sense that he, out-of-the-box thinker that he was, grabbed a club so he could threaten squares, and risked running past everyone to give the other guys a flanking bonus and to eat some hits for the team. Blue had terrible armor class, what with Dex being his dump stat. Almost unheard of for an unarmored character, but he had surprisingly good hit points thanks to his psionic body feat. So he could eat 2 or 3 hits from a troll's claws, though of course if 2 claws hit his terrible AC, then it rends, and that would knock Blue unconscious, but would not have outright killed him from full hit points. Blue, with his stats, had basically no offensive options while out of power points. Jinx had been feeling pretty ineffective with her weapon attacks for the whole campaign, and Blue was markedly worse than her at throwing or shooting or clubbing. So if only he had heard about the rest, or if I had double-checked when he started doing crazy things, he could have stayed back, blasted from a distance, and very likely survived the fight. But to be fair to me, Blue's player, Little One's player, doing something bizarre and risky is not the red flag it might have been for someone else. There was one subject that kept coming up in side discussions, but which I kept cutting out of the last couple episodes' scripts. Horror movie tropes. The players had lots of funny lines, but I knew if I included much of that, then after this episode, it would all feel like heavy-handed, forced foreshadowing, and almost disrespectful of the characters. If I want to treat their deaths as tragic and emotional, it clashes to be joking too often about them, often specifically Jinx, dying. But when they found the torn-in-half sailor in a temple, it started a discussion of which one of them would be next to die, by horror movie logic. Depends, the tropes work differently for main characters and secondary characters. I know, I changed into blackface. No, what you want to do is turn into the white blonde woman, but not the slutty one. You don't have to worry about that. Somebody's got that covered. Adria looks at Paylor. Huh, am I a person of color? I mean, I'm a color, but if I'm the kid, then I'm probably safe. I feel like I'm the strong guy who ought to survive, and therefore I'm screwed, narratively. Well, we have 2 notable female characters. Could try to figure out which one is the stronger, more aggressive one, because that would be the Vasquez, so she tends to die. I'm not much of a fighter. Neither of them are, really. I mean, I just lie, mostly. Of course, Adria's conclusion was, we just need to find the sailors. With so many NPCs around, the monster is sure to kill them first. Then, when Jinx was trying to smooth things over with the sailors, I can do it. I could help you intimidate. Wait, my intimidate is better than my diplomacy. Instead of doing diplomacy, I should be Phil the Thug. Just intimidate everyone? Just make sure to stick to Phil the Thug so you don't end up like Phil in Avengers. Phil Coulson? I don't think you want to end up like Phil the Thug either. Isn't that the first corpse we found in Halfling Town? You copied him because he was dead. Not to mention in the earlier episode when I joked about Jinx mimicking a corpse and dying from her wounds. No, my dedication to lifelike realism. Someone who had very little chance to survive the fight, given the way it started, was Jinx. I didn't want to punish the player for trying diplomacy, but in my head, my mental map of the situation was lurking up there, perched on top of the mantle, lintel, whatever you call the stone crosspiece. And if Carl was there, waiting for an opportunity to drop down and kill somebody, it made no sense not to have it try to do just that. As an aside, I was real annoyed to realize I had not drawn prominent crosspieces atop the pit room's stone door frames in the previous episode. I'm supposed to plan ahead. I knew this was coming, so that minor omission bothers me to no end, and I had to try to squeeze in a wide enough shot in a couple places in episode 8 to give you a chance to register the shallow stone ledge in the hopes that people would not notice something amiss when it turned out to be important. So anyway, Carl was up there, claws sunk into the stone wall above the doorway, shadow mantle soul meld helping conceal it. I didn't bother giving a perception check because I figured it made no difference. Once Jinx stepped out far enough to have a chance of seeing the monster, it was going to drop down and attack. Even noticing quickly and trying to back away wouldn't get her out of its reach, in my mind. She really needed it to roll a 4 or less on one of its 2 +10 to hit claw attacks, so as not to trigger the bonus rend damage. Had one of the frontliners walked out first, Paylor or Misho, they have better armor class, with every little point measurably reducing the chance the troll would hit twice in one round. Plus, they have significantly more hit points between their tougher classes and their higher constitution scores. In other words, either of them was likely to survive the attack, and then Jinx would presumably have started her singing buffs, at least gotten some attacks in, whether or not they'd have hit, so the whole battle might have gone very differently. A character being very low or even unconscious is just so much different than instant death. As long as they're alive, there's a chance for players to try crazy things to save each other. One of my regrets about this fight was how I revealed Carl's second set of actions. Going in, obviously you want to reveal it by taking the second turn, when it comes up in the initiative order. Usually I just apply -10 to the boss's initiative roll for the second set to make sure it's spread out, though I might tweak that if it would result in team initiative. I don't want the boss acting twice in a row without a player in between, unless they kill enough PCs that it can't be avoided, obviously. But it worked out really bad here because Jinx rolled terrible initiative, so her first turn of the battle was coming up after Carl's second action. Then, Adria successfully dazes the troll, which is great. Fewer attacks incoming this round, but that made the reveal awkward because now they weren't expecting him to act before Jinx did. So then when should I have told them? As soon as he was dazed, should I have told them? In hindsight, probably, but in that moment, I thought, well, that blunts the impact of the revelation. I hadn't necessarily processed just how likely Carl was to kill her, but had I told them it was still going to attack before she could move, would they have realized it and taken the kind of desperate action you take when you're sure your friend is going to die? Sure enough to do something crazy, like have Misho forego his pounce attack to toss her out of the way? I don't know if they would have seen it as that desperate, that lethal, even though his attack routine in Phase 1 is just what a regular troll does. There's always a balance to strike between my animation skills, what I can do and what I can't, how cool I want a scene to look, and the time I'm willing to spend to achieve that. Jinx's demise added the extra question of how violent, how grotesque to go with the imagery. Between the pacing of the scene, the music or lack thereof, and all the time and characterization that led up to this moment, it's certainly possible to make it emotionally visceral without being visually gruesome. On the other hand, a certain amount of nastiness does help to sell all those things and to counteract the high fantasy problem that so many injuries can get better with magic. Ultimately, I wasn't going to be drawing organs anyway. Would be a lot of work, and going too far in that direction wouldn't really fit the art style of the show. But torn in half was how it was described at the table, and definitely sells it as different from the average critical hit. Plus, I figured I could sell that pretty easily with lots of blood and relatively little art. I needed to use that time for extra touches like Jinx's skin pigment fading back to her gray changeling base form, and Blue tossing off his robes to cover her up. That was something I definitely wanted to show from my script and my mental storyboarding, but between the pace of the dialogue and the difficulty of animating cloth and stuff, we ended up with very close camera angles and very quick shots, probably slightly too quick, before moving on. The other thing with tearing Jinx in half is that her player, Launchpad, later made the joke about her legs getting an attack when everybody gets an opportunity attack. So I knew I wanted to leave her legs as a token on the map until that moment. All the joy and the pain. After foreshadowing all last episode, plus the predator trail in the jungle, and then, it being about to kill 2 PCs, I definitely had to put some design work into selling Carl the troll as a threat, finding a balance between my goofy-ass troll body plan, which I had no intention of changing. I've liked picturing them this way, with scrawny, all-bone limbs but giant blocky fists and head, ever since my Infinite Hall novella's first draft in high school. A balance between that, and yet trying to sell this as a dangerous, living thing in the world. There was a bunch of intentional work, tweaking the shapes, trying to make that janky off-kilter jaw look like it could open and close, adding a narrow waist section that shows some bone structure underneath, and generally using more articulation than I usually do, mainly to sell the physicality of Carl's initial landing. But I think it really came together when, through some trial and error, I came up with those round bumps all over the torso and shoulders, which created the perception of texture, helping to make my weird lanky troll feel more biological. Obviously, abusing the silhouette was a big key to elevating Carl from just big and ugly to a legitimately scary presence. I tinkered around with a few variations before I got the eyes right, but those little red point pupils staring out from the black void really scream evil, and also create a point of continuity between the detailed sprite and silhouette versions of the character. That didn't work nearly as well when Carl had visible eyeballs. And of course, the silhouette makes it easier to animate big dynamic attacks, though honestly, Carl didn't make all that many attacks for somebody with 2 full turns every round. Carl's stats are actually pretty close to a standard 3.5 edition troll, or rather, 2 of them. It has some totemist soul melds on top of that, but they aren't all combat focused. In his first phase it mostly just had +2 AC from the Wormtail belt, with its other meld mainly giving stealth bonus. While in the second phase, it loses that, but gains an extra 2d4 fire damage on its attacks, keeping up its DPS when it only has a single turn to use it. Or, conversely, note that I did not give the boss extra damage when it did have double the actions. I did, however, fail to account for those buffs in its challenge rating, and in hindsight, instead of 2 CR5 monsters, making a CR7 encounter, it really should have counted as 2 CR6 monsters, making a total of CR8, which is a pretty deadly encounter for this party. Duh. Then again, Uhamisho's damage per round bears very little resemblance to what the books expect from a level 4 adventurer either. And it's a 5 PC party instead of 4, and they have a whole bunch of not entirely useless sailors lying around. Actually, the Fireheart Soul Meld adds damage against enemies grappling you. I chose to interpret that as purely defensive, so I didn't deal the 2d4 per round to Blue while he was being held, but you could reasonably interpret the ability to work on offensive grapples too. Note that even in Fire Troll mode, Carl has no resistance to fire, the classic troll weakness. That would just feel mean. Now, when Carl first appears, I use silhouettes a lot, and even when it's visible, it's shrouded in a lot of black glows from its shadow powers. The monster's visibility kind of increases as the battle continues until the party deals enough damage to force the transformation to Fireheart Troll. Growing the vertebral bumps into glowing hot spikes was easy enough, but I broke out the animation to do at least a lazy head turn to sell the moment, and from then on, no more shadow glows. It was all about adding as many looping flames as I could without going insane trying to keep things in line, and trying to avoid creating animation glitches. It's easy when the creature is standing still, but becomes a pain when doing even simple moves like an outstretched arm. Also, I kind of love the ugly, bubbling black regeneration sequence. I was getting near done and couldn't afford to spend a ton of time on it, so I'm quite happy with the quick compromise I scribbled out. Speaking of an outstretched arm, since Carl is an utterly immortal being who, due to some warped connection to evil essentia, feeds off the suffering of sentient beings, It has no fear, no true imperative to kill you before you kill it. Carl can really focus on making its victims terrified, making them feel pain, despair, anguish, and hopelessness, making them hate. Carl could probably have murdered Blue easily with regular attacks. The little guy is near impossible to miss, except the one round when he spends all 3 torque of displacement charges. And Rend does so much damage. But Carl isn't worried about winning. It's a troll. It knows, or at least experience has led it to believe, that it will always get another chance. That's the gift of Delphosh. Even if the heroes somehow win, even if they burn Carl's body to ash and scatter it to the winds, that indestructible jaw will remain, silently mocking them, threatening them, laughing at them. It will always grow back, rising to strike again. So, with that long view, that well-founded lack of a sense of self-preservation, Carl can just focus on the emotions, on feeding. That's why both in-universe and as a game master, it felt right, rather than just rolling some dice to almost certainly kill Blue, to turn it into a choice for the party. They could choose to let Carl escape, not much of an option since, as Blue said, there's little chance it will keep him alive once it's out of sight. Or they could kill the damned troll and let Blue drop. In a sense, Carl was forcing them to kill their not sure they're ready to call him a friend. Obviously, it's not really their fault, but still forcing them to pull the trigger, making it feel like their fault. And by making it their choice, I, as GM, was also giving them a Hail Mary chance to dig through their toolkit and try to come up with a third option, a way to save him. I don't have an issue with how I adjudicated the fall, pull arm, save to grab situation, other than how do you set a life or death DC for that? 10 plus 1d6 is kind of the coward's way of shirking responsibility, but I'd already killed one PC. My main issue going through all this again, as I made the episode, was why did I know, technically, Adria's idea? That one makes me mad it passed me, because yes, I was correct. We double-checked at the time. Her magic ring only casts Featherfall self-only. But A, when it's time for heroic actions, it's time to give plausible ideas like that a favorable interpretation. And B, Blue weighs freaking 20 pounds, like a sack of potatoes. The spell may say one creature, but even low-strength Adria could carry an extra 20 pounds. At most it would encumber her. Having to transcribe, script, record, and animate that, it seems like such a stupid call. I should have let Adria dive after him, grab him and featherfall herself, float down with him, and then see how it went with all the spheres at the bottom. Fans of the original TDDC expected the indestructible jaws, from which the troll will eventually regenerate. That's just what trolls do, thanks to the evil god Delphosh. You, and the players, did not expect the indestructible jaws to also be immovable, which is fair, considering that in that previous campaign, Little One, the Orc Slayer, picked up 2 pairs of troll jaws and adorned his shield with them for a couple weeks. Thing is, everyone knows you can't move troll jaws. Retcon? My main comment is, nothing has changed in the events of the original series. When GE7 saw that shield, he immediately assumed the troll jaws were fake. Unfortunately, we probably won't learn more about that anytime soon because these characters never saw whatever that was. The SoS party are stuck dealing with this immovable troll, depending how long they stay in the area of the Snake Temple. Were the players, Launchpad and Little One, really so chill when their characters were dying? Well, yes. It helps that we were all adults, even 10 years ago when this all happened. But adults have feelings too, and losing a character you care about is rarely easy, especially when it's as sudden, as brutal, and as seemingly out of nowhere as Jinx's death. Part of it is that I was clearly very sorry about one-shotting her, especially when Jinx didn't really get a chance to respawn, though that's partly because she had a bad initiative roll. But one major reason that Launchpad seemed okay with it is that when the players decided, let's call it a Sudoku pact, to all roll their stats at character creation, Jinx, along with Adria, were the ones at the bottom of the bell curve, and not having enough stats to be competent at both spellcasting, defense, and attacking was getting a little frustrating. missing all the time, such that her main contribution was just Bard Song and some healing. Nobody was complaining about Bard Song. But that was combined with the Spell Thief problem. Spell Thief is so cool in theory, but it suffers from both implementation problems, that you have to sacrifice sneak attack damage to try to steal spells, not knowing for sure what you'll get or even whether they have any spells left to steal, but it also suffers from the structural issue that if the enemies don't have a spellcaster who is vulnerable to sneak attack and who you can get to and hit, any fight that doesn't have that means your Spell Thief levels are just bad rogue levels. And the 3.5 rogue isn't exactly a powerhouse to begin with. Already, like 40% of the monster manual is immune to crits, thus immune to sneak attack, without which rogue might as well be a non-combat character. Well, a huge number of monsters just don't have spells, especially in these early levels, which further narrows the situation where a Spell Thief can feel cool or useful. So, for all that he seemed to enjoy changeling shenanigans and that Bard Song was effective, ultimately, Launchpad was somewhat unsatisfied with his character mechanically, and the idea of trying out a different build had to be pretty tempting. For a while he'd been joking about coming back as Jinx's sister, a sorcerer, and maybe only half joking. By the same token, Little One loved some parts of Blue. He liked the psionics in general, and there was some appeal to being a little gremlin who doesn't breathe. But he was also not totally happy when it came down to it. His stat rolls weren't so bad, that wasn't really the problem. He had intentionally dumped Dex for more mental stats, and he had more hit points than any D4 hit die character ought to have at this level. The player just generally likes trying out builds nobody else is trying, finding ways to make it work. What he was finding underwhelming was the all-saving throw offense. Avoiding any touch or ranged touch spells was unusual, at least in my experience, but it meant Blue didn't need his dex at all for offense, and on paper, there's nothing wrong with using saving throw-based attacks instead of spells with the hit rolls, especially since knowing a variety of spells could let you target the enemy's weakest save most of the time. In practice, though, there was this combination of bad luck, where I, as GM, rolled way better than average for the bad guy's saves against him, with the silly but hard to ignore human psychology that when you miss an attack that you roll, it feels like the dice's fault, and to a tiny extent your fault. Whereas when your attack fails because of somebody else's roll, it feels out of your control, and even more so when the roll is hidden behind the GM screen. So while he didn't want Blue to die, and was trying to survive the crazy risks he was taking, Little One wasn't exactly broken up about the idea of a new build. And then there was the role-playing issue. Little One seems to start most new characters with relatively minimal backstory, and then kind of discover who his character is through gameplay and RP. His thought going in was that Blue, with his high mental stats, might be almost a Yoda-like character. Calm and nope! Impatient, violent murder gremlin is how he turned out, and after some early inconsistency, the irritable and violent shit disturber was the version that won out, and the player wasn't always happy with his own answers to, "What would my character do?" as the personality solidified into a little psycho with not a lot of depth behind it. Now, when adapting SoS, I dredge up and emphasize fleeting hints of depth, like the quick bond he formed with Tiggy, and, of course, the way Jinx and he started covering for each other. I'm taking those things and building up the connective tissue around them to make for a stronger story and richer characters. But at the table, without that editor's touch, he just wasn't finding much role-playing meat. And add in the frustration with saving throw spells and the fact that another new PC needed to be introduced regardless, and, well, neither of them was as heartbroken to start planning backup characters as the rest of us were watching Jinx's and Blue's stories end. Yeah, Dave. Unlike the whole Briarstone affair, where he left on bad terms, Dave just kind of disappeared years ago. I never got the impression it was anything I or the others did or said. Little One's player was closest to him, and didn't have much more info. It seems Dave had just decided he'd rather go live in the woods, off-grid. So, when I got word that he had died, I really hadn't seen or heard from him in about 10 years. But it was still sad to hear. Dave was the oldest of us, the TDDC SOS crew, but only by a few years. Apparently, men in his family had a medical condition that tended to take them in their early 50s, like some mystic curse they can't escape. And alas, Dave was no exception. I always list the player as just Angel in videos because I never really got a chance to ask him about using his name, but the Departed aren't worried about doxing, and I figured using just his first name was more appropriate as a tribute. In role-playing games, Dave would come with a backstory for his character. Nothing super involved or complex, no 10-page reading assignment, but always a background with a little drama to it and a little mystery. Just the right sort of thing for a GM to work with. I'm not sure I involved those backstories as much as I would have liked. What with my, here are 3 plot hooks that take you in different directions, then branch into 3 more, sort of campaigns, but I tried to bring it back in now and then. And while he certainly wanted to win the battles, whether it was Angel or Adria or another character, I think Dave was much more interested in building a character who could do all kinds of cool and unusual things, even if they weren't exactly powerful, and then play around trying to find ways to gain advantage from those outside-the-box abilities. But hopefully this was a half-decent tribute to him. It might be a little confusing for some people to have 2 character deaths in one episode, and neither belongs to the player who died, though of course these things will happen when adapting a game more than a decade later. So, when Adria took up the grim task of searching her literally fallen colleague's body for magical valuables, she spider-climbed down the deep pit to what remained of Blue's remains. She took his torque of displacement and a couple other little things. Fortunately, magic items are much harder to break than flesh and bone. But then the malicious spheres began rising out of the ground surrounding the ornate stone disc. A whole bunch of spheres, far more than Adria could reasonably fight without Pelor and Misho to stand in front of her. It looked like a very ugly situation when a blue sphere rose up in front of her and did something. At least, it hovered there, and the other spheres of the more aggressive colors, paused. I bring this up because I know some people wonder, was that just one of the blue spheres being weird? They don't exactly act like they're on the same team as the red and purple ones. Or was there some connection between the blue sphere and Blue, the recently deceased Blue Goblin? I bring this up because people ask, but of course the answer is, who knows? Often the beauty of a moment like that lies in the ambiguity. One of the complaints about modern role-playing games is that spell levels and PowerPoints and rules lawyery spell descriptions drain magic of its magic. So, if I said, that was Blue's soul, or, nope, it was just another one of those curiosity spheres and it communicated X and Y to the others, that would rob the moment of that rare sense of wonder. Instead, Adria bows to it, which Dave declared at the table, not one of my additions, before bolting up the wall to escape. And I find it all fairly poignant, without further editorialization. My awesome Patreon patrons get Secrets videos about a week early so that I can answer some of their questions in this final video on YouTube, where I read the questions out in random, sometimes ridiculous, voices like this. 3C273 asked, I know you said you don't make purely random encounters, so I assume the fight composition and Carl was planned. But what about their rest being interrupted and Carl joining the fight? Interrupting was part of the plan. I thought giving them back half their resources should be plenty for one big fight, and even more so when they crushed the orbs so hard that those all ran away after dealing almost 0 damage. Now, it has been so long that I'm trying to reverse engineer my plan more than I can actually remember it. But I feel like my intention was to hit somebody hard, from Carl's perspective, to kill one, then retreat, hide, and pick a time and place to come at them again later. But in 3.5, you're allowed to make one attack first, then decide whether to complete your full attack, or you can decide, nah, treat that as a standard action, and move afterward. Move is a discrete action you get once per turn, and that move action gets eaten if you full attack. And as I said in the episode, Carl had one-shotted one hero then scored a hit on the next one, halfway to a devastating rend attack on Misho. So instead of doing the hit and run, Carl thought, why not keep killing a bit longer? My trolls don't generally worry about opportunity attacks, if they're trying to do something. Usually that means eating AOs to get to a squishier target, but in Carl's case, it really considers escaping to be a win, letting its victims stew, leave them paranoid, wondering when it's going to strike again. Especially after already killing one, so that the fear is combined with grief. Carl didn't even really fight back in Phase 2. Why bother? It was pretty sure it was getting the kill on blue, and just wanted to milk that situation. Now, it probably won't be back for a while. It's still unclear how fast a troll can start to rebuild their body if they try, if doing so as fast as possible. And even when it does, Carl would need a long rest after respawning in order to heal back its extra life bar and get back to full power. Trentos01 asked,
Well, I'm certainly eager to see how things pan out. Will they use a wish to bring the pair back? Or are the players going to be rolling up new characters?
I've seen a few people wondering this, but do they have access to a wish now? Do they even know how far they are? How long it will take to get this wish or wishes, if they're even real? Nope. So clearly, Paul and Launchpad need new characters. And bear in mind, this question was asked before the patron preview of this video. Given the above explanations, it's a safe bet they'll be characters with stronger combat builds, intending to stick around. Gregor Lives asked,
So, trolls. 2 questions. 1. With the new revelation that the draws are immovable, on top of being indestructible, how do towns, people, kingdoms, etc. deal with them? Do you have to bribe them to go away? Kill them so much they decide it's not worth the trouble and leave? Rush to build a cairn on top of the jaws so even if it regenerates its craft? 2. Since trolls are truly immortal, why are they not everywhere? Every new troll born would be another permanent problem, wouldn't they? Or are they like the Vampire Kings, extremely wary of adding more to their kind?
Second question first. As far as anyone can tell, since receiving the gift of Delvash, trolls either don't reproduce at all anymore, or if they do, there's some other kind of extreme limiting factor we don't know about. According to myth, they did reproduce back in ancient times. In fact, some old myths claim they could reproduce just by ripping off an arm. Arm grows back and the severed limb would sprout a whole new troll. If you believe that BS. But regardless, there is no sign their numbers have increased since the dayless day, since the death of the sun god. As you say, if they were reproducing normally, even slowly, over the last 1,000 years, you'd expect them to have overrun everything, or at least, you'd find a set of jaws under perpetual guard in, like, every second town. As for question number 1, though, which seems extremely pertinent right now for some reason, the answer is step 1, fire, and I forgot step 2. When a troll shows up, it is a capital P problem, and in some cases a permanent one. But first and foremost, the thing that stops trolls from just ravaging cities and doing whatever they please is that 90% of them are just regular-ass trolls, except immortal. Sure, they can rip through a dozen soldiers, but 24 soldiers is probably enough to hack them down and burn them. What happens then depends on the numbers. If you were a platoon of 30 or 40, you just buried a third of your troops, and now you have troll jaws to guard. Whatever your mission was, you can't possibly do that and watch the jaws. So either your new full-time job is bonfire keepers until relieved, or else you have to retreat and hope the troll loses interest, or force march forward and hope you can lead it into your enemies. So far, this is all good fun for the troll, all according to plan. But step things up 1 order of magnitude, and the troll is not so happy. A town of even 300 people can quite possibly keep a bonfire burning year-round, depending on climate and resources. And it doesn't take 24/7 fire. That's just a precaution, because then just one person can watch a fire while others grab lunch or take a piss. But as long as you have the ability to make fire when needed, just a few armed guards can start bashing at the troll when they see any signs of growth and, light some torches and burn it back down, hopefully before it regenerates enough to really fight back. In practice, people are terrible at maintaining that sort of thing for more than 1 or 2 generations. But what if they're dwarves or Kua who live like 3 centuries? Now, it's almost inevitable that the troll, with infinite time on its hands, will escape during a rainstorm or a windstorm, or when the number of 24/7 guards gets reduced yet again, or when a harvest fails and half the population leaves or dies, or just next time some other random monster attacks the village. But you can start to see how, even without massive earthworks or powerful magic, the troll can simultaneously be a great danger, a permanent threat to the people nearby, and yet this really isn't working out for the troll. They don't want to spend hundreds of years, or even a couple of years, trapped inside cold, unfeeling jaws, just listening for an opening, or watching. Can the jaws even see? In fact, it's possible that many of them actually go insane from scenarios like this, and that may be why you don't hear about too many ancient, experienced trolls getting clever and causing real havoc. Now, when you get a smart troll, you are bound to have real problems, but number 1 rule of most of the smart trolls is, don't get yourself into trouble you can't get out of. There's a reason you tend to run into trolls far from civilization, where they're unlikely to face a group with enough numbers, much less the persistence, to spawn camp them for more than a few days. If the troll runs into a dragon or a monitor, they're cooked. Gonna have a short, bad fight. But are those guys really gonna waste their time making sure you don't get up? Unlikely. They'll have something better to do, and will move on soon enough, and then you can grow back and prepare for the next suckers who wander by, who are hopefully closer to your own challenge rating. But yes, if you're a bunch of regular villagers, not even soldiers, then bribery may be worth a try. Martin asked, "What kind of troll is Carl? Cave troll, shadow troll, something else? He also seems somewhat intelligent. Is there anything else you could tell us?" Carl isn't any weird alternate troll stat block. I just use default troll as a base, though I'm sure I qualitatively describe it as a shadow troll at some points. Because I was going to do so much to it anyway. The double life bars and actions from Angry GM's boss rules, then giving it Incarnum soul melds as a basic totemist, plus a martial training feat for a single once per combat maneuver, then swapping in different soul melds in a new maneuver for phase 2. Carl isn't exactly a Machiavellian genius, but it is clever enough to make educated guesses about what victims might do, to create plans and to set ambushes, and to use those Essentia manipulating bracers that it found within this temple back when it first discovered this place and began to feel the strange power within these runes. If you want a minor spoiler though, not all those useless tunnels in the alcoves are the same size, and not all of them just wrap back around to a different alcove in the same hall. Carl not only used some of the bigger tunnels to move around without being seen, including one that comes out down in the fire pits near where Carl left that half of a sailor. But a couple of those tunnels also lead back to a room we haven't seen yet that Carl is using as its lair. I don't remember if the PCs ever stumble onto it. Rinsaku Blade asked, "We see Carl is able to influence the glowing sphere things, which is rather scary, but does make me wonder, are there any non-human creatures that manipulate or use Essentia or Incarnum powers? Or is the nature of the tapestry difficult to use? Actually, Carl can sense the orbs. They're made of Essentia, and Carl has a connection to Essentia. But the troll is not really directing them in any magical control sort of sense. It's more that they are physical-ish entities with an instinct for self-preservation. So on those occasions when Carl wants something from them, it hunts them down around the ruins, then threatens or bullies them into position. Go there or I'll rend you, being the implication. World-building-wise, a lot of things were already fairly defined as arcane, divine, psionic, so being a late addition, representation of Incarnum, Essentia, the tapestry, falls into the cracks a bit. It ends up being tied mostly to fae and spirit stuff. The way that all emotions and actions are imprinted onto the tapestry clearly ties into how the fae sometimes know things they could not know in the context of making or enforcing a bargain. But instincts and the wisdom of nature, of all animals, are imprinted onto the tapestry too. That's the sort of stuff totemists like Uhamisho tap into, but I think it's also the source of power for most extraordinary and magical beasts. I mean, what is instinct, if not the ability of animals to recognize a situation and to respond by drawing upon the evolutionary wisdom of their ancestors, stretching back down the tree of life? Banana Man 343 asked, "You have talked about how the Diluvians worship the ball through endless war and endless slaughter. Does this mean some Diluvians supported the Illud civil war just to make a greater slaughter for their goddess? Or are any Illud still around to secretly worship Blibal, keep the war going, and maybe even contributed to the rebel government's failure to abolish slavery?" There were definitely Diluvians who thought the Illud Rebellion was a great opportunity for a holy war. I mean, if you worship Blibal, all wars are holy. And there were quite probably at least some who were part of the Illud Rebellion who thought the new nation would continue to worship Blibal, but just do some stuff differently. I think those would be weird edge cases. I'm sure it happened, because the Illud didn't start off saying, "We're gonna worship Lockmaul! Who's with me?" Their choice of religion happened later, and mainly because it was pragmatic to enforce a state religion so that Blibal wouldn't fill the void. And the Diluvian side of the war has gone all in on that sort of propaganda, that they have to purge the traitors for Blibal, and to save the Empire. I would say the slavery thing is more of a Delvash problem, though. Wherever there is slavery, it makes Delvash stronger, increases his influence on that society, to the point it becomes hard to separate cause and effect, because the god of tyranny is always pushing on the minds of anybody who might be inclined to enslave others, encouraging the oppression. Not only was Delvash certainly encouraging those among the Illud who were benefiting from slavery to keep it going, but Delvash was and remains very strong even inside Blibal's own theocratic empire. Oppression goes so well with empires that it, and by extension Delvash, is always creeping in, no matter what other gods are influential there. Actually, what you're talking about, Kuo-toa pushing for war with themselves, holy bloodshed for Baal, in the present, I see that more as a reaction to the Civil War, not a cause of it. What it actually reminds me of is the Shadowfin heresy, centuries before. Godfin Shuazul, most powerful monitor in history before Du and Unon, was sure that Blibal would want a monitor emperor, strong enough to kill thousands with his bare hands, rather than the weaklings the corrupt priests kept anointing to the throne. Shuazul literally told his followers that the empire has become too lazy, consolidating what they had, instead of reaching for more conquest, more war, more blood. The Godfin was sure that they had lost their way, that they were failing Blibal by not being violent enough. And that's why he led his monastery to take on the army and all 4 other monasteries. so they could slaughter all the weak and passive Kua in Blibal's name, make Choiseul the emperor, and then take the holy war worldwide to conquer the land nations, the dragons, and even the other planes beyond. Administrator Orange asked,
Continuing my questions for Korstrad. 1. What was the relationship between the Smith and the barbarian tribes of Korstrad? Was it a live and let live situation, or did the tribes actively tell Smith to get bent? 2. If a PC has the ambition to reform the kingdom of Korstrad, what would they need to do, and how would the other nations react?
The Smith's expansion into Korstrad was actually later in his life, but early enough in history that the towns, the farming people, as opposed to the nomads, still took up such a small area of the subcontinent that they had little to no conflict with the tribes. And the Smith himself, because he was so awesome, a mighty warrior and master craftsman, of course, but also just a guy who would talk to people and really listen to them. He got along great with the hunters and gatherers and elders of the tribes. Again, there was so much space back then, and the population of the village people was so much smaller compared to what it would be in Korstrad's heyday, that the peoples barely got in each other's way at all, and actually, once Smith bridged the gap, they started meeting and trading more in ways that benefited both sides. Western metalworking tools and techniques for Eastern pelts and herbs. Later on, of course, the agricultural populations multiplied geometrically, while the nomads only grew linearly. So with the nation's expansion, tensions and then real conflicts arose. But that was long after the time of the Smith, and frankly, things between the people of Korstrad and the tribes never really escalated to major, full-on wars until everybody's favorite nobleman, Demonac, joined the king's court. Now, in the present, if PCs set out to forge a new nation on the ruins of old Korstrad, I actually don't think the elves or dwarves would have any problem. They don't exercise any control in that area now. Elven Crown has no interest in expanding, and it would take a pretty crazy dwarven dawn to try to establish a settlement there. Though, as I say that, I could see some wacko trying it. But honestly, if somebody could unite and protect the farming towns and tamp down on the mega beasts that are running amok, the nations around would probably be thrilled. Except human nobles with that ambition do pop up now and then and never seem to make any real progress before getting bogged down fighting off giant moose, bears, etc., plus regular-sized orcs. The main political problem would be a bunch of jerks questioning your authority and stirring up dissent because you don't have a noble bloodline. Or, even if you do, some of the nobles would think you were the wrong family. But securing even one town in a sustainable way would be hard, and if you ever got big enough, then you would have to establish relations with the tribes too, though at least in this era, they too live in fortified towns, except Misho's tribe, of course. So it's easier to arrive at a common understanding of territory and borders than back when they were nomads. Then, to get the wildlife under control, you'd probably need a campaign of appeasing and or defeating various nature spirits around the subcontinent, and then you have to figure out some way to fend off periodic orc bands without becoming too exciting to the rest of them. Bessie asked, "What's your philosophy when dealing with the risk in TTRPGs? Is it game-dependent for you, or more uniform over all your games? Also, have you made any changes in your 5D RPG that reflect your attitude towards risk as a GM and or player?" Dealing with risk in general, it's pretty hard to generalize too far. As described in this video, I'm not thrilled with how things worked out in the episode, and particularly how I adjudicated the Featherfall thing in the context of, what can we do to save him? Which is what you want PCs doing. I like the idea that death is on the table in major fights, or even in regular fights if the party is under stress, not at full resources. But I also have a lot of sympathy for the idea, the practice some tables have, where if the rules say your PC dies, GM should take them aside, give them a minute, and let them decide whether or how that character's story ends. For example, if we'd been doing this in SOS, I'm pretty sure Paul would have been like,
Sure, Blue dies. He got in that troll's face, helped the others win.
and Paul was ready for a new character. Similarly, Launchpad may have been ready to let go of Jinx for the reasons described, but it's also possible the player might have not wanted to die in that sudden way without a chance to respond, especially since that was before Blue died. So if he'd expressed the desire to keep Jinx alive, a wise GM might instead have had her knocked back into the room, maybe at -5 hit points and bleeding, so she could be saved, participate in the fight if somebody dropped a heal on her, and not die like that. Though, of course, if the party wipes, they wipe. Characters can also be kidnapped or suffer some kind of injury, whatever the player and the GM can agree on as a way to continue, if roll up a new guy doesn't feel like the best option. Because people have such different and valid ways to do that, my inclination for 5D is to present optional rules similar to that, but I think the default is still the assumption that if you die, you die. It's pretty darn hard to get one-shotted in 5D. To actually die, you generally have to go down to 0 HP, at which point you suffer trauma. A pretty nasty debuff connected to one of your 4 stats, strength, dex, int, will. Then, if you go down again, or take damage while you're at 0 HP, another 3 times in the same battle you'd have trauma to all 4 stats, and then you're dead. If you get trauma, but survive the fight, you only heal 1 trauma per day. So the more you go down, the riskier it is to go down again, until you have had time to recover. But the more challenge rating, how harder fights sort of questions, that stuff for 5D is all in flux because the system, the PC options, and the monsters are all so under-tested. Relevant to the episode we just watched, though, 5D has an explicit rule that if you go off a cliff in almost any way, you get a falling ledge save, which is a pretty easy save, and if you make it, you end up hanging from the ledge, which is still a dangerous place to be, and you'll need an action or help from a friend to get back up to safety, but it feels very heroic fantasy. Frankly, I've been strongly considering making the rule that if you fall far enough to hit terminal velocity, it straight up half kills you. 2 trauma, and remember 4 trauma equals death. So if already injured from recent battles, you might just die. But if you are a healthy adventurer, you both couldn't straight up die from a fall, unless, say, the GM warns everybody in advance, this pit is death, basically. But no matter how tough you are, if you can't hover or fly or something, falling terminal velocity will cripple you for the fight, and leave you at a lot more risk for a couple days at least. Cloud4N asked,
I wanted to say how much I enjoy Paul's characters. That ending hit pretty hard, but eventually I realized it just means a new Paul character. So that's exciting. My question is, how do you deal with the unresolved stories connecting to a PC's backstory when that PC dies? Do they become less urgent, fading to the background, or do they become a reminder of the lost ally, forcing the remaining PCs to take up the quest in their name?
I don't know that I have a generalized solution, and I'm hopefully always getting better at thinking about things like that, though I'm still not great at running the game, managing the table. But these 2 PCs happen to be the ones whose backstories added the most prominent organizations to the world in the story. And those plans weren't going to stop just because they happened to inconveniently die here and now. Now, the connection between these two, those organizations and the plot, was not super well communicated through the remainder of this campaign. The party kept dodging the situations where I planned to drop clues and communicate that information, and I was never quite agile enough to just get them the info anyway. So part of my main objectives for SOS are to actually link all those things for the audience, and in character as much as I can, even though it can't change what the party actually did in any significant way. But another goal is just to make sure their departed friends aren't just left behind and forgotten in character. I'm hoping to have their presence and their impact linger, even though it's bound to fade over time, just like the pain of loss dulls, eventually, IRL. I am, as usual, working hard on the next episode and behind where I wanted to be. In this case, half a session failed to record, and I barely have notes for that section. Though, at least I have the maps and I remember a few key details, which all meant I had to go through 2.5 sessions worth of recordings looking for clues about what happened, and now I have to rebuild half the dungeon and puzzles almost from scratch and fill in the player's behavior. So I'll do my best, while also keeping up the new Nerf Wars episodes for patrons, who are already up to number 16. And reminder, in case you haven't heard, but all current and future secrets, extras, and junk like that are going to be posted here on the Demonac Extras channel, not my main channel, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks again to all my patrons who make this channel possible, with a special shout out to the members of the organization.